Video, I'll talk about the main principles of research ethics. Ethics deals with the study of right and wrong. So in particular, we're interested in how these principles apply in research. Primarily, the students who take this course are going to be doing human subjects research, but there are also special ethical considerations for animal research. In this video, I'll be focusing on human subjects research. And I'll address at what stages of the research process certain ethical considerations tend to arise. First, a brief history of research ethics. So the Tuskegee syphilis study conducted in Alabama was one of the earliest examples of researchers taking advantage of a vulnerable population in their research. So this is a pretty unfortunate event in the history of research. Notice that this study was conducted over a 40-year period, which is also not a good thing. In particular, the researchers were studying the disease syphilis, and they were basically allowing a large group of poor black men from the rural South who had syphilis to go untreated even for many years after a treatment for syphilis was developed, basically after penicillin was available. The Nuremberg Code, the Helsinki Declaration, and the Belmont Report are three important documents that have guided researchers around the world at different points in our history. Most of the content in this video comes from the Belmont Report, which is the most recent of these, from 1979, which came from national legislation called the National Research Act, which led to the creation of the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects, who then wrote the Belmont Report. And this legislation also led to the creation of institutional review boards, which are currently the organizations that are responsible for approving research that goes on within institutions. So Springfield College has its own IRB, and as part of your research process, you'll be expected to submit an application and a lot of supporting documents to IRB, which they'll use to make a decision whether your plan for research is ethical, and if not, what changes do you need to make. I also just wanted to mention briefly the Stanford Prison Experiment. This was conducted in 1971 at Stanford University, and that's a study that we're going to be talking more about during class. So here are the basic ethical principles and their applications that I'll be talking about. So the principles are respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, and each of them has its own respective application, and these are informed consent, risk-benefit assessment, and selection of subjects. So starting with respect for persons as the ethical principle and informed consent as its corresponding application, respect for persons is based on self-determination theory, which is very much focused on protecting the autonomy of people. So people having free will to decide what they want to do, whether they want to participate in a study. So in particular, we need to make sure that people understand what the study is about, what they're getting themselves into when they agree to participate in a study. So this requires special protection for people with diminished autonomy, such as people who are ill, incapacitated, or have a mental disability. The informed consent process has three important pieces. One of those is information, which involves basically giving participants information about the purpose and procedures of the study, the risks and benefits that they're going to experience or potentially experience, the measures that are going to be taken to ensure their confidentiality, the fact that they have the right to withdraw from the study at any point and without penalty from doing so, They need to be given certain information, just practical information like the researcher's contact information in case they want to ask any questions or contact the researcher to leave the study or things like that. And then another important piece of informed consent is comprehension. So the researcher not only needs to inform the participant, but needs to check and make sure that they understand the information, offer to answer any questions, etc. And finally, voluntariness. So the researcher needs to take certain considerations to make sure that the participants are not feeling coerced or unduly influenced to participate in the study. The second principle is beneficence, and its corresponding application is a risk-benefit assessment. So beneficence refers to the notion of doing no harm. So basically trying to maximize the possible benefits to your participants and minimize the possible harms. So risk-benefit assessment is basically just kind of determining the nature and scope of the risks and benefits, and basically weighing them against one another to make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. And this includes risks and benefits to the subjects themselves, to their loved ones, and to society at large. The third principle is justice, and its corresponding application is selection of subjects. So justice refers to the fair and equal treatment of people. It addresses the question on what basis are subjects selected. So are subjects from a vulnerable population? Are they from the population that is most likely going to benefit from the findings? So in other words, we shouldn't be selecting a more vulnerable population or really any population of people if some other population is more likely to benefit from the findings. So we need to make sure that we are selecting subjects in a way that is fair in terms of people having access to participate in the study and also treating people in the study fairly. So this involves making sure that if you have a treatment that can benefit people that are experiencing a certain condition, whether that's like a health condition or what have you, that at some point that all of your participants will benefit from that treatment. So that may involve withholding treatment for a period of time. And again, this has to be weighed against sort of the severity of the condition and things like that, and the possible benefit of learning about the treatment. So certain groups that need to be considered in terms of their vulnerability include racial minorities, people of low socioeconomic status, people who are very sick, and people who are institutionalized. So privacy and confidentiality are two important issues in research ethics. So I just wanted to cover what the difference is between these two ideas. So privacy is about people. Privacy is about their sense of control over what others can access about them. And that's in their opinion, from their perspective, not from the perspective of the researcher or the IRB. So this involves making sure that if people may not want others to know that they're in a study, there's privacy about kind of their coming to and from the study site. If they have to like change clothes or put on a device or something like that, that they can do so in a private setting. Confidentiality, on the other hand, is more about the data that you'll be collecting from these people. If the data are accessed by somebody else outside the study, can the data be linked to the individual person's identity? So confidentiality is an extension of privacy, but it's a little bit different from privacy. It's also about the maintenance of records and who can access the data. So just taking steps to make sure that data are in either a locked setting or a password protected setting that others can't access the data. So I mentioned before that throughout the research process, different ethical considerations can arise. So at the planning and proposal stage, the researcher needs to consider the different ethical principles that we've talked about. For example, they need to perform a risk-benefit assessment, and they need to apply and obtain IRB approval. After this happens, they can begin recruiting participants and collecting data. And at that point, the important considerations involve the fair selection and treatment of subjects, as I talked about, related to justice, going through the informed consent process, as I talked about, with respect for persons, and also ensuring the participant's privacy. And then later, when you're storing and analyzing your data, making sure that the confidentiality of that data is protected. And then at the reporting phase, the researcher needs to ensure participants' anonymity. So in qualitative research, that involves using false names or pseudonyms for your participants, not giving their real names in the write-up, or not naming the organizations that participated in your study. For example, if you have subjects from Springfield College, you're not referring to the college by name, you're referring to it a little bit more vaguely, a private college in the northeastern United States, something like that. And also academic honesty is important when you report your study. So making sure that you don't plagiarize, making sure that you don't misrepresent your findings. So obviously kind of your own ethical considerations come into play at the reporting phase.